Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 30th chapter of Inheritance, written by A is for Amy 71 on AO3. It's melee for our entree when it comes to the sports festival. With my new obsession of watching Survivor, I wonder if pool noodles and pedestals will be involved. Probably not. It'll probably be a lot more dramatic than that. Let's find out after the trigger warnings. This fanfiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe Is Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel! Canon Divergence is the name of the game and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. The second event of the sports festival. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 30. Ladies and gentlemen! Midnight called out. The cameras focused on her perch on the lowest stage, where she was sitting on a pipe tube that was straight out of a video game. This stage was only about 2 meters off the ground. Welcome to the second elimination round. In this round, our contestants will be attempting to knock each other from these stages any way they can, including using these. She reached down into the pipe to pull out a long pole with padding on both ends that made it look a lot like a giant cotton swab. Don't be fooled by its benign appearance, she warned when the crowd started to grumble. Each of these babies packs a punch with a spring-loaded tip on the end. She dropped the pole down on one end, and the impact against the stage caused it to trigger and bounce about 3 meters into the air. When it came tumbling back down, she caught it deftly and gave it a swirl like a long baton. She pressed the sprung end on the floor and reset it before twirling it again. The other end! She smacked it against the pipe and there was a bright flash and a snap of electricity. The crowd roared in approval as Midnight's hair showed distinct signs of static. We'll give whomever it hits a short jolt of electricity, not enough to injure, but possibly enough to incapacitate for a second or two. Each weapon is designed to allow for 5 charged hits before it simply becomes a battering ram. Kaminari was rubbing his hands together in glee, and Izuku made a mental note to steer clear of him, if possible. Can we use our quirks too? Karchan called out loudly enough to be heard by Midnight. Of course, she said with a purr into her microphone. It's more fun when it's rough. The men in the audience shouted and applauded even louder at the double entendre, as Karchan grinned with satisfaction. You are also allowed to move from stage to stage if you're able, she added with a smile, but beware! If any part of you touches the ground at all, you're out of the competition. The red powder you see on the ground will stick to you and be an indicator of whether you touched, but it is also a shock-absorbing substance that will help cushion anyone who falls from an unsafe height. Several students shuffled backward to ensure they wouldn't touch any red before they even started. To begin, there can only be 4 contestants on each stage maximum. The 10 students who finish first will have 3 minutes to choose a stage to start from. The next 10 will then get a chance. Then the remaining 30 will take their places in the remaining spots. There are lighted circles on each stage to indicate starting points, and that is where you will pick up your weapon. When the lights turn green, the battle begins! The contest ends when 40 students have been eliminated. The last 10 will advance to the final round. Once Midnight had finished her explanation, a ramp lowered down from the first stage to the edge of the grass. Ladders on tiers above then dropped down from one stage to the next, which overlapped or came close to the next tier down so that it resembled a giant, hollow wedding cake in shape. There was one small stage at the top with barely enough room for 2 people. then 3 stages on approximately the same level with each other in a triangle pattern around the top, but about 3 meters down. Those looked like they could hold 3 people, but it would be a close combat situation. Below those was 6 more stages of varying sizes in an offset circle, and then 6 long, narrow stages at the bottom in another triangular setup. The bottom ones were the ones that would be the easiest to be forced off of, because they were only about 2.5 meters wide. "This could be tough," one of the kids from 1B muttered, looking concerned. Izuku wondered what his quirk was. Anyone with decent reflexes and physical fitness at least stood a chance of getting a place in the final round. The biggest threats were going to be Yoarashi with his wind, Karchan with his explosions, and Todoroki with his ice. If he could avoid those 3, he felt like he had a good chance. But was there any chance that Karchan wouldn't come after him to eliminate him? Not good. "Those of you who placed in the top 10, choose your starting place," Midnight said. In an instant, there was a series of explosions as Karchan headed straight for the top stage. Yoarashi gathered a whirlwind to lift himself up to one of the topmost stages as well. Izuku ran up the ramp and then levitated, choosing a spot in the upper 6th stage tier, planning on facing off against some of the students who had finished lower in the rank of the first round. Avoiding the strongest was a valid strategy here. If he could eliminate enough to whittle down the numbers, his levitation could help him avoid touching the ground, as long as he didn't get caught in a wind. This stage had quite a few columns and poles jutting up from the floor. There were bars similar to those he'd used in gymnastics class, something that resembled a pommel horse, but without the handles, and pairs of rings hanging staggered in a row, like monkey bars almost. A parkour setting, perhaps? There was no padding on the floor, though, and no place to land softly. The entire stage was about 5 meters, and a ragged circle shape as if it had been ripped out of an urban park or something. He tightened the straps on his gloves as he searched for where he should stand. He found one of the 4 lighted circles and stood in it, where it blinked once and made a quiet chime to indicate it had been chosen. He picked up the padded staff, which was heftier than he had expected it to be. There was a tiny lightning bolt painted on the handle under one of the pads, and a spring pictogram under the other. Easy enough. None of the first 10 chose the same stage as him, and 3 minutes after the first, the next 10 were allowed to take their places. Again, none of them chose his stage. The final 30 were allowed to move in then, and that was when 2 other contestants took places near him, each a few meters away. He heard the chimes as their rings accepted them, but then he heard a third, though no one seemed to be standing on it. Malfunction? Or Hagakure? The weapon didn't move, and Izuku kept his eye on that spot while the countdown began to wind down. The size of the platform meant that not all of the circles would be occupied, so it was possible that it was just an indicator that all the contestants were in place, and everything was locked down to start. As soon as his ring turned green, Izuku took no chances and lunged for the empty ring and felt something solid. He got a grip on what felt like an arm and spun in a fast circle.
Ow!
A girl's voice complained as one of the contestants advanced on Izuku and got hit by an invisible girl for their trouble. While the attacker was reeling back from the blow, Izuku flung Hagakure toward the edge of the platform, hearing her shriek as she went over the edge. If luck was on her side, she'd manage to hit a stage below and continue her fight. If luck was favoring Izuku, she'd miss and tumble to the ground. Izuku didn't have time to contemplate on it, because the other 2 who were on the platform were engaged with each other at the moment. He could barely hear present mics shouting out the numbers of those who were out as he quickly retrieved his own weapon and Hagakure's. He flipped them so that the lightning bolt on each was facing forward and flung his arms out wide, bringing them together to hit the other 2 fighters in the backs of the legs, taking them by surprise and stunning them. He flipped one of the staffs and jabbed one of the fighters in the chest while his legs were buckling, causing the spring to engage, giving him a hefty shove over the edge of the stage and out of sight. The second boy he'd hit with the jolt of electricity was faster to recover and advanced on Izuku with his own staff. Izuku danced on the balls of his feet and waited for his attacker to charge. He waited until the boy's weapon was in range, then used the spring end of his remaining pole to launch himself in the air. On his downward drop, he slammed the staff onto the boy's arm, making him drop his own weapon. Izuku dropped his staff and wrapped his arms around his opponent, holding his torso immobile. The boy kicked at his shins and even tried headbutting Izuku, but it didn't do him any good. Izuku simply heaved the boy off of his feet and walked to the edge of the stage. He flung the boy outward and saw him land on the stage below, which wasn't that far of a drop. Before Izuku could decide whether to go down or up, 2 more fighters dropped from stages above, and another sprung up from below. The one who had sprung up was Tsuyu, but she seemed intent on travelling upward past this stage, so Izuku didn't pursue her. The 2 that had fallen immediately tried to climb back up to where they had fallen from. Izuku waited until one was halfway up the rope ladder on one side, then just pulled with One for All on the rope until it snapped. He had intended to use the ladder as a sling to throw her off the stage, but she got tangled in it and fell down. A quick glance told Izuku that she hadn't been lucky enough to land on a stage below. "No, you don't!" Izuku spun to find Uraraka behind him, and nearly levitated to get out of her reach, but she had slapped the hand of the second person who had fallen. He had been trying to sneak up on Izuku, and Uraraka had sent him floating. Izuku grinned and leaped up to give the floaty boy a hard volleyball-type slap that sent him out past any stage. Uraraka released her hold and let him drop into the sea of red below. "Thanks," Izuku said. "You saved me."
10 of us can make it to the final round, she said. It'd be cool if they could all be from 1A.
"Yeah," Izuku said. "Wanna pair up for the rest of this?"
"Nah, I'm on my way to the top," she said with determination. "Wanna give me a boost?"
Izuku crouched so that Uraraka could put her foot in his threaded fingers, and then use her quirk on herself. A moment later, she was soaring upward to the next level of stages. Izuku was suddenly inundated with a large group of contestants from the lower and adjacent stages, and was considering abandoning ship to another stage when he had a thought. He backed up to the edge of the stage he was on, leaving a couple of meters to be safe. He had fighters approaching from every direction, though most of them were distracted by each other, as they sought to unbalance those around them. Izuku took the opportunity to really charge up One for All. He added a little levitation until he was about 3 meters up, his head almost brushing the underside of a stage above.
"Hey, why is he glowing?"
one of the girls on the stage asked warily as the green sparks flared. Izuku balled his fists and let himself drop like a rock, slamming his fists onto the floor of the stage in the process. As he had hoped, the stage listed down under the pressure of his blow, and the other end shot up like the bow of a sinking ship. His arms stung as bodies came tumbling past Izuku, who had to quickly levitate again to keep anyone from trying to take him down with them. He knocked his head on the underside of the stage above again, but it wasn't hard enough to injure him. He watched in amazement as the end of the stage he had hit dipped to knock 2 of the lower stages off balance. Had they been rotating, sending several kids over the edges? A couple had to leap to keep from being crushed. The end that had hit the stage above had also caused a few to fall. Izuku ran up the slope his stage now created and used it to jump onto one of the stable ones. Maybe he could unbalance another the same way. Just then he realized that he was facing Kachan, who had come down a level, and that Yoarashi was on the other stable stage slightly below but adjacent. Todoroki stood on the remaining stage, which he had iced over, with glistening icicles hanging from the edges. Crap! Kachan was just about to attack when a loud horn sounded and the crowd broke into deafening cheer.
"We have our 10 finalists!" Present Mike shouted frantically. Can you believe it? These 10 powerhouses took down 29 of 40 classmates in just 37 minutes.
Izuku could hear the rumble of Aizawa's voice making a reply, but couldn't make out what was being said. He had made it. He had a feeling that most of the tougher opponents had been taken out by the others, but that didn't matter in the long run. He turned to look at one of the screens, which was practically at eye level, and saw the names and pictures of the top 10 finishers. Yorashi Inasa, Class 1B, 8 students eliminated. Midoriya Izuku, Class 1A, 8 students eliminated. Todoroki Shoto, Class 1A, 3 students eliminated. Shinso Hitoshi, Class 1C, 3 students eliminated. Bakugo Katsuki, Class 1C, 3 students eliminated. Asui Tsuyu, Class 1A, 2 students eliminated. Uraraka Ochako, Class 1A, 1 students eliminated. Kirishima Eijiro, Class 1A, 1 students eliminated. Sero Hunter, Class 1A, 0 students eliminated. Shiozaki Ibara, Class 1B, 0 students eliminated.
Dang! I thought I got a lot more!
Uraraka pouted as the stages lowered closer to the ground for easier dismounting. I would have gotten more if I'd started at the bottom, Yorashi reflected. I'm pretty sure the stages were moving around, Kirishima said as they reached the grass. Just because the area below was clear one minute didn't mean there wasn't another stage there the next. I think you're right, Izuku said with a nod. We might have tossed a lot off our stage, but then they landed safely or were able to climb back up and someone else knocked them off later. Someone else? Sero asked incredulously. You took out, 4 of the stages with one hit. Izuku blushed and scratched the back of his head. Sorry. Don't be sorry, Kirishima said, wrapping a companionable arm around his shoulders. That was cool as hell. A few of them were scraped up, but none of them was seriously injured. Thank goodness. Izuku hoped that none of the competitors who had fallen or been thrown off had been injured either. There was one girl there with what looked like thorny vines for hair, and he wondered if she was able to control them. That might explain how she kept herself from falling off any of the stages. The other finisher looked familiar to Izuku, and it took him a moment to realize that he had been one of the kids who had come to the 1A classroom to pick a fight. We'll be taking an hour break for lunch and such while the field is cleaned up. Please feel free to enjoy some of the field games or rest and relax until the final round, Midnight told them once they were all on firm ground. You're allowed to go to Lunch Rush for food or hit the concession stands, but you must be back here in 1 hour or forfeit your spot. Got it? Yes, they all answered in unison. I'm gonna go find my dad, Izuku told the others. See you after lunch. Izuku waved to the others and darted around a group of reporters before they could close in on him. An hour wasn't all that long, and Izuku wanted to be sure to get a bite to eat before the final round to keep his energy up. He fought his way through the surging crowd, many of whom tried to stop him to congratulate him on his performance. Many wanted to know exactly what his quirk was, but he just smiled and shrugged. He finally spotted his father, who was looking at the signs on the walls saying where the participants' waiting rooms were. Dad! He called over the heads of the crowd. His dad squinted into the sea of people who basically dwarfed his son, but he finally spotted him and waved. Izuku reached him a few moments later and led the way to the waiting room for 1A. It was unsurprisingly empty, since most of the others were off getting lunch or playing on the field. His father was holding a shopping bag that was full of festival food, and he set it down on the table and started handing his son containers of yakisoba, okonomiyaki, and all sorts of other snacks. Not the healthiest, I know, but I knew you'd be hungry. You didn't manage to eat much for breakfast. It was true. Izuku had been far too nervous to eat more than a few mouthfuls of rice and some miso soup. Now he was ravenous and dug into the greasy food with gusto. While he ate, his father described how the latest event had looked to bystanders.
When you hit that stage and made it go almost vertical, every screen in the arena focused on you,
his father said with obvious glee.
You look so badass with the green sparks flying around you. Everyone was asking who you were and where you'd come from. It was amazing.
Izuku grinned at his father's enthusiasm and wondered if All Might and Sir were just as impressed by Izuku's performance, or if they saw the flaws in his thinking or movements. He knew that he would likely have to go over his performance with them and with Aizawa and his class to critique it, but for now it was nice to have his father's appreciation and attention.
Look, Zu, his dad said as Izuku plowed through the food like a starving man. I know you're feeling a lot of pressure to perform well today, and you have been, but I want you to know that even if you don't win, you've done incredibly well. I'm really proud of you.
Thanks, Dad, Izuku said, getting a little choked up by how sentimental his dad was being.
Your mom would have been very proud too. She was always telling me how you pretended to play as All Might, saving people from the clutches of evil. Now, you're actually training to do just that.
I wish I could have saved her, Izuku said quietly, hanging his head.
She was a hero too, his dad told him, dabbing at his eyes with a napkin. And the reason you get to be here today.
Then I better do my best to make sure I deserve that, Izuku said with determination. They cleaned up the remnants of the meal, and Izuku walked with his dad back to the entrance of the field where they parted ways. There was some sort of scavenger hunt going on as he went out to the field, and the floating stages and red powder were now mostly gone. For some reason, the girls in his class were dressed as cheerleaders and beating on Kaminari and Mineta with their pom-poms. Izuku pinched the bridge of his nose, as he had often seen Sir Night-Eye do when he was feeling tested by the nonsense happening around him, and finally understood why. He had a feeling that some of the boys in his class were a little too focused on the female anatomy for their own good. He might have to have Sensei intervene before one of the girls seriously maimed one of the boys. One of the support students won the scavenger hunt, and everyone cheered as she was given a large bag full of sports festival swag as a prize. The girls had finished delivering their punishment on Kaminari and Mineta and had disappeared, presumably to change clothes before the final event. There was some sort of entertainment in the middle of the field that was keeping the crowd entertained, but Izuku was too nervous to pay attention. The last event would have him facing off against the strongest students in first year, two of which he didn't know the quirks of.
Are you ready for this, Midoriya?
Uraraka asked as she appeared from behind him a short while later. She was back in her normal gym clothes, and looked as nervous as Izuku felt. I don't know, he admitted. Any ideas what quirks Shinso or Shiozaki have?
Shiozaki has vine ropes for hair, and she can make them grow or retract at will, and whip them around like crazy. I got swiped with one of them and it scratched my arm up pretty bad. Recovery Girl fixed it super fast though. Shinso, I don't know about.
He's the guy with the hair, right? Sero asked, coming up behind them. He mimicked an explosion around his head to describe Shinso's hair, and Izuku nodded.
No idea what he does. He doesn't look very intimidating, but he outlasted all those others, so he must be able to do something interesting, Sero guessed. Maybe Bakugo knows. They're in the same class, aren't they?
I don't think he'd tell us, even if he does know, Izuku said doubtfully. Right now, we're rivals, and his spot in the hero class is on the line.
That's true, Sero realized thoughtfully. You think he'll make it?
Maybe, Izuku said. He's definitely strong enough, and his quirk control is amazing. That's pretty much what he's being judged on today, so he has a fair chance. I don't know how many people he's been up against who are just as good as he is, but Yorashi is no joke, and neither is anyone in our class.
Do you want him to come back?
Uraraka asked. I don't know,
Izuku said thoughtfully. I guess that depends on if he's learned what he needed to do, so he could satisfy Aizawa. I think it's ultimately up to him. He must think Kachan's got the potential, or he wouldn't have given him this chance. I guess, she said, though she didn't sound convinced. Have you seen Ida? Izuku asked, trying to remember when he'd last seen the deputy class rep. I know he made it through the first event, and I'm pretty sure he ranked high enough for the second, but I haven't seen him. He left, Kirishima said, walking up to the small group. He left? Izuku and Uraraka both said together. Why? Izuku wondered if Ida had been ashamed of not making it to the final event and had left to lick his wounds. That didn't seem his style, though. I don't know. He got a phone call just after the first event and took off. Said something about a family emergency. Oh no, Uraraka said, putting a hand to her mouth. I hope everyone's okay. Only something really bad would make him miss out on the sports festival, right? Izuku was afraid she was right. He was about to reach for his own phone when Present Mike started shouting for the final 10 contestants to take their places in the middle of the field. There was a raised circle about 40 meters across. It wasn't raised much, less than a meter, but there was nothing besides a white chalk line to mark the edge of it. There was a small set of steps leading up to it, but most of the competitors ignored them and simply hopped up onto the dirt circle and met Midnight in the center. Ladies and gentlemen, Midnight announced to the roaring crowd, our final event today is called... The screens around the arena did the slot machine effect again, until it stopped on the words, Flag Tag! Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. Seeing how proud of Izuku his dad is makes me feel all warm and fuzzy, and I really just want a hug from the man. I wonder what Flag Tag will entail. Maybe it's like the bandana stealing event from the anime? We'll find out next time! All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction. A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of when I next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah.